What would happen if a CEO disguised himself as an ordinary customer to inspect the very restaurant he built, only to discover that everything inside had rotted away? Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his spacious office on the top floor of the Caldwell's group building, where the afternoon light slanted through the glass walls, casting faint streaks across the polished wooden floor. The large screen in front of him still displayed revenue charts bleeding red, each downward arrow stabbing like a knife into the pride he had built with sweat and blood over 30 years. Caldwell's Grill branch, number 18, once a symbol that young chefs dreamed of working at, had now become an ugly stain in the reports, criticized by customers across every platform. Terrible service, disrespectful staff, the food isn't what it used to be. The words repeated over and over, haunting him like accusations. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes staring distantly. On his desk, amid stacks of financial documents, sat an old, faded photograph. A younger version of himself 30 years ago, wearing a grease-stained white apron, grinning brightly beside a roaring stove. That photo had once been his greatest source of motivation, a reminder that all greatness began with the smallest details, with every piece of meat flipped on the grill, every thank you given to a customer. But now, cold numbers and lifeless reports had stripped him of the connection to the very reality his empire was built on. "It's just an underperforming branch. We'll replace the manager." The board's words echoed in his head, hollow and dismissive. Ethan knew no report or meeting could reveal the truth. Only by seeing it with his own eyes would he truly understand what was happening inside the kitchen that once bore his name with pride. He stood up, his movements slow but filled with determination. His steady hand pulled open the wooden drawer where he kept his old mementos, taking out a gleaming straight razor, the one he used to shave every morning back when he still worked the grill. In front of the bathroom mirror, the present-day Ethan Caldwell, the wealthy CEO with neatly combed salt and pepper hair, a carefully trimmed beard, and an expensive suit, stared back at himself with cold eyes. The blade touched his cheek, and with each slow, deliberate stroke, the white foam and gray stubble fell away. His bare skin emerged, revealing a small scar on his left jawline, a burn from the time hot oil splashed onto his face when he was still a young cook. Ethan paused, his fingers brushing the scar, a bitter smile crossing his lips. That scar had once been a badge of pride, proof of a man who dared to get burned, who endured pain to create dishes that left customers in awe. Now, it served as a reminder of how far he had drifted from that past. "It's time to go back," he whispered to himself. In just an hour, the powerful CEO vanished entirely. In the mirror now stood an old man with messy silver hair, thick glasses, and a faded windbreaker. A worn baseball cap was pulled low over his brow, hiding most of his face. His polished leather shoes were replaced with scuffed sneakers, and he wore a wrinkled plaid shirt. Every detail was calculated so no one would ever connect him to Ethan Caldwell, the founder of the Caldwell's Grill Empire. Looking at himself in the mirror, he gave a small smile. Good. No one will give a second glance to an old man like this. As he stepped out of his office, he left behind the glass walls, the heavy reports, and the admiring looks that usually followed him. Ethan entered the elevator, gripping the brim of his cap tightly. Under the soft yellow light, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath. In that moment, excitement, nervousness, and anticipation surged together in his chest. For 30 years, Ethan had fought countless battles, but this was different. This was not just about reclaiming the reputation of a brand. This was about reclaiming the soul he had poured into every dish. The old pickup truck he rented sat parked in front of the building, blending in like it belonged to an ordinary worker. When his hands gripped the steering wheel, Ethan Caldwell ceased to exist. In the rearview mirror, an old, weary man stared back at him with experienced, knowing eyes. And as he drove toward Caldwell's Grill branch, number 18, Ethan murmured like a vow to himself, "If they've forgotten the Caldwell spirit, I'll remind them, no matter what it takes." Caldwell's Grill branch, number 18, appeared before Ethan Caldwell like a gray, lifeless painting, a far cry from the glorious memories he once held of this place. The deep red sign with golden letters that used to shine with his pride was now coated with a thin layer of dust, and a few flickering bulbs blinked weakly as if ready to burn out. Stepping out of the old pickup truck, he tightened his worn windbreaker and slowly made his way toward the glass door. Memories came rushing back. The days when the restaurant overflowed with customers, when every time the door swung open, waves of smoky grilled meat filled the air, mingling with cheerful laughter. But today, as he pushed the door open, what greeted him was only the dry chime signaling a new customer and a cold, heavy silence. Inside, no one even looked up. Melissa Quinn, the hostess standing by the counter, was tapping her nails against the surface in rhythm with the music playing through the small earbuds hidden under her hair. She glanced at him for barely a second before turning away, her eyes indifferent, as if looking at an old piece of furniture that didn't belong there. The wooden tables and chairs, which Ethan had once insisted must be wiped spotless before every shift, were now scattered with breadcrumbs and streaks of dried grease. He stopped for a moment, his hand resting on the back of a chair, fingers brushing along the rough wooden surface, coming away dusty, making him frown slightly. This was not the Caldwell's grill he had dedicated his life to building. Ethan chose a seat in a secluded corner, where he could observe everything without drawing attention. The disguise was perfect, an old man with tired eyes, worn sneakers, and shabby clothes. As soon as he sat down, a scene caught his eye. The door opened again, and a young couple walked in, laughing happily, hand in hand. Melissa immediately removed her earbuds, her entire expression shifting in an instant. A bright smile spread across her face as if a spotlight had been switched on. "Welcome to Caldwell's Grill. Your usual table is ready," she said enthusiastically, leading them to a window seat, wiping the table quickly and leaning forward with a polite tone. "Would you like some wine today? We just got a new batch in." Ethan watched everything, his face calm, but inside, something sharp twisted like a blade. There were clearly two worlds here, one for wealthy, familiar customers, and another for those deemed unworthy, like him. A few other staff members glanced at the couple, smiling and nodding politely, but turned their backs indifferently to everyone else. Ethan lowered his gaze, his hand pressing against the dirty table, fingers tracing the crumbs and grease stains. His voice was barely a whisper, low enough for only himself to hear. "So here, a person's worth is measured by their wallet." Time crawled by. He remained seated and no one came to ask him anything. No menu was placed in front of him. Young staff members gathered near the counter, occasionally glancing at the customers before returning to giggling over something on their phones. A family of 4 walked in and had to find their own table, while the young couple was being pampered, every wave of their hand answered immediately by attentive staff. Ethan looked toward them, then around the restaurant, studying every light, every mirror, every stain on the floor. Beneath his thick glasses, his eyes flashed with the cold, sharp look of an old lion silently watching its prey. On the outside, he might look like a tired old man, but inside, his blood was boiling. Caldwell's Grill had been built on one foundation alone. Every customer should be welcomed like a guest of honor. But here, that principle had been trampled without mercy. Ethan quietly adjusted his cap, leaning back in his chair, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table, as if still patiently waiting. But in his mind, he was already mapping out every step, one by one, just like he once planned the recipes for his finest dishes. Outside, the sky began to darken with slow-moving clouds, the dimming light casting long shadows, like a storm quietly forming in the distance, and Ethan Caldwell was that storm. The soft clinking of dishes broke the cold silence, and for the first time since entering, Ethan was approached by a staff member, Clara Reyes, her name stitched carefully in silver thread on a name tag, though faded from countless washes, approached his table. A woman in her early 50s, slightly thin with streaks of silver in her neatly tied hair, wearing a uniform worn down at the shoulders. She placed a menu on the table, her voice soft and polite. "Thank you for waiting, sir. I'm sorry for keeping you so long." There was a hint of genuine concern in her eyes, a look so different from the rehearsed smiles Ethan had seen elsewhere in the restaurant. He looked up, eyes narrowing slightly behind his thick glasses as if trying to read every detail in her expression. and he noticed it beyond the fatigue etched in the dark circles under her eyes. There was still a glimmer of light, the kind only found in those who once truly loved their work. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the menu down. Ethan's gaze lowered, noticing a support bandage wrapped around her right wrist, its edges frayed as if she hadn't even had time to replace it. "I'll have the T-bone, medium rare," he said slowly, his eyes still fixed on her trembling hand. Clara nodded, carefully writing down the order, each letter precise, as though making a mistake would be disrespectful to the guest. But that respect, it seemed, belonged to her alone. From the counter, two young staff members, Lena and Josh, leaned against the soda machine, whispering and snickering. "She still hasn't retired? Moving that slow and they still keep her? Strange." Josh lowered his voice, but just enough to be overheard. "Probably because no one else wants to do the hard work. Look at her, like she's about to break her back any minute." Lena covered her mouth to stifle a laugh, her eyes glancing deliberately in Clara's direction. Ethan heard everything. His ears had been trained for years to catch the quietest murmurs in kitchens, to read attitudes hidden behind small talk. Slowly, he turned his head, his eyes hidden behind thick lenses locking onto the two young staff members. His stare was icy and sharp, making Lena flinch and Josh clear his throat awkwardly before pretending to adjust the soda machine. They didn't know who the old man was, but something in their instincts told them that those eyes did not belong to an ordinary man. Clara returned with a glass of water, setting it down carefully in front of him. She gave a small, sincere smile so genuine that it caught Ethan off guard. How long had it been since he had seen an employee at any of his branches smile at a customer like that? Not because of protocol, but because they believed the work was worth doing? Clara's voice was quiet, trembling slightly. "I'll do my best to make sure your food comes out as quickly as possible. Please be patient." Ethan nodded without speaking, but something deep inside him stirred. As Clara walked away, her back slightly bent, every step careful as if she were afraid of dropping anything on the tray, she passed the younger staff without reacting to their mocking glances. She simply kept working, as if it was her mission. Ethan's eyes followed her every move. In that moment, he felt something profoundly familiar, that dedication, that quiet pride. It was the very thing he had once given to Caldwell's Grill decades ago. The weary old man with silver hair in the truck's rearview mirror faded away. Behind the thick glasses, in the unwavering gaze, Ethan Caldwell, the man who had started his career with bare hands in a small kitchen, was awakening. And he knew now. It was people like Clara who made this brand worth saving. Time passed slowly, stretching Ethan's patience to its limits. Tables around him were being served one after another, while he sat quietly in the corner, ignored as if he didn't exist. Finally, Clara returned, placing the T-bone steak in front of him, the very dish that had once made Caldwell's Grill famous. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, his eyes narrowing behind his thick glasses. The legendary dish that had once left diners in awe with its perfectly seared crust and juicy, tender interior now sat before him as nothing more than a dull piece of meat, its edges charred black, the fat shriveled. Ethan picked up his knife and cut slowly. The blade didn't glide smoothly as it should have, instead dragging across the meat with a faint scraping sound. He brought a bite to his mouth, chewing slowly, each bite feeling like biting into an insult. The meat was tough, dry, carrying nothing but the bitter taste of burnt oil. He swallowed, his throat tightening, not from the steak, but from the anger building inside him. This was not the Caldwell's Grill he had built. Setting his knife down, Ethan cast a cold glance toward the kitchen through the glass panel. In that moment, he made up his mind he had to see with his own eyes what was happening inside. Rising slowly, his appearance that of an unremarkable old man, he went unnoticed. Gently pushing the kitchen door open with his sleeve, he left it just ajar enough to look inside. The sight before him froze him in place. David Ross, the head chef of Branch 18, the very man Ethan had personally selected and trained, was lounging in a folding chair in the corner of the kitchen, shoes propped on the table, arms crossed, snoring lightly. Beside him sat a half-eaten sandwich and an open soda can. The main kitchen, once alive with constant sizzling and fire, now looked abandoned like a dusty storeroom. The grill was cold, knives and cutting boards scattered messily, grease pooling on the counters uncleaned. Ethan's eyes caught more details: spice pans left unattended, thin layers of dust forming, the refrigerator door hanging slightly open, its yellow light flickering weakly. Ethan didn't step inside. He stood there, his hands curling into tight fists, knuckles turning white. He remembered every day he had spent in the kitchen himself, scrubbing every drop of grease, checking every cut of meat, scolding staff for even the smallest mistake in plating. And now, the chef he had once trusted slept during work hours as if all the values Ethan had built were nothing but a joke. Closing the kitchen door quietly so as not to draw attention, Ethan returned to his table. He picked up his knife again, cutting another piece of the dry steak, chewing slowly, his outward demeanor calm. But his eyes had changed completely, no longer just watching. Now they held the cold, sharp focus of an old lion preparing to strike. In his mind, the pieces began to connect. The staff's indifference, the poor food, the sleeping head chef, and above all, a culture of service rotting away day by day. Ethan knew what was killing Caldwell's Grill wasn't a lack of customers or money, it was the lack of heart. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the cold, lifeless kitchen through the glass. Silently, he made a vow, his thoughts cutting through the air like a blade. "All right, David, if you've forgotten why you were chosen, I'll remind you, and this time there won't be a second chance." The soft clinking of cutlery echoed faintly in the otherwise detached atmosphere, while scattered laughter and idle chatter drifted around the room. Ethan sat quietly, his cold gaze fixed on Clara, the only person left in this place who still carried a sense of pride in her work. She moved carefully from table to table, each step deliberate as if it cost her the last bits of strength she had. Her wrist was wrapped in a worn support bandage, her steps slightly uneven, yet she wore a soft, genuine smile, not the forced kind, but the kind born from the simple belief that her work deserved respect. But not everyone thought the same. Ethan had heard the murmurs from the service counter since Clara left earlier, but now the whispers were sharper, louder, almost as if they wanted everyone to hear. Josh, the tall young man with perfectly gelled hair, leaned casually against the counter, his voice lowered but loud enough to carry. "Look at her, dragging herself around like that and still clinging to this job. Pathetic." Lena, the young woman with dyed bright hair, smirked. "Pathetic? I'd say she's just slowing us down. Always moving slow, taking days off for doctor visits. Honestly, she should just retire already." Josh chuckled, his tone mocking. "True. Maybe management keeps her around just to avoid training someone new, because what else could she even do anymore?" Ethan set his knife down, his hand curling into a fist beneath the table, though his face stayed calm and unreadable. He stood, walking slowly toward the counter like an ordinary customer about to ask a simple question. No one paid attention to him until he stopped right behind Josh. They kept talking, voices careless and almost proud in their cruelty. Ethan cleared his throat, low and deliberate, a sound that cut through the air like a bell toll. Josh turned, meeting Ethan's gaze. Behind the thick glasses and the disheveled silver hair, there was something that made him hesitate, a silence too heavy to ignore. Ethan said nothing, simply looked into Josh's eyes, then shifted his gaze to Lena. In that brief moment, Lena lowered her eyes instinctively, while Josh scratched his head awkwardly, pretending to adjust a tray on the counter. Ethan didn't need words. His look alone carried the message. "I heard everything, and you will answer for it." He turned back to his table, sitting down slowly, continuing to cut into his cold steak as if nothing had happened. But inside, anger boiled. His eyes searched for Clara. She kept working, kept smiling gently at each customer, even as those vile words trailed behind her. Watching her, Ethan felt a mix of pity and admiration. How many people like Clara had been overlooked, dismissed, in the very system he once took pride in. And how long had he allowed people like Josh and Lena to behave this way under the Caldwell's Grill name? Taking a deep breath, his cold stare softened slightly as he watched Clara carefully place a tray on another table. In that moment, he whispered to himself so quietly no one else could hear. "You don't need to say anything, Clara. I've seen enough." Ethan lifted his glass, taking a slow sip, his eyes flicking toward the counter where Josh and Lena were now deliberately avoiding his gaze. In his mind, the pieces of a plan were falling into place, and it would begin the next time he walked into this restaurant not as an anonymous old man, but as the founder of Caldwell's Grill. The meal ended in heavy silence. Ethan had barely touched more than 2 bites of the steak, yet he remained seated, waiting. Clara returned with a small notebook and the bill, her steps slow, her shoulders slightly slumped from exhaustion. She still carried that soft, gentle smile as she placed the tray down, her voice quiet and kind. "Thank you for dining with us. I hope you won't be upset if today's service wasn't as good as it should have been." Ethan looked up, his gaze lingering in her eyes, and in them he saw a sincerity that was almost painful, a dedication struggling to survive in a place slowly rotting away. As Clara walked away, his hand moved to the bill tray and noticed something unusual. A small folded piece of paper was tucked carefully beneath the receipt. He glanced around quickly. No one was paying attention. Slowly, Ethan unfolded the paper under the table, the worn creases suggesting it had been held many times before the decision was made to pass it on. The handwriting was slightly slanted, a little shaky, but every word was clear. "I have tried speaking to management, but they protect each other. No one listens, no one cares. This place was once a source of pride, it was once a family, but now only indifference remains. If you are someone who can change something, please come back. Come back as who you truly are. Please don't abandon this place." Ethan paused, his hand tightening around the paper until it crumpled slightly. His eyes lingered on the last line a plea sent out, not knowing if the person who received it could even help, yet sent with a fragile hope. A woman like Clara still believed someone out there could save it all, and she had placed that hope in a stranger, not knowing that the man sitting before her was Ethan Caldwell, the one who had built this empire with his own 2 hands. Folding the note carefully, Ethan slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket as if it were a crucial piece of evidence in a trial. In his mind, every word written rang out like an undeniable accusation, not just against Mark Heller, the manager of this branch, but against himself. For too long, he had stepped away from the kitchen, away from people like Clara, leaving heartless individuals in power to destroy his legacy. Clara returned, her eyes carrying a flicker of worry as she glanced at him, as if waiting for a reaction. Ethan said nothing, only gave a slight nod, his eyes softening in a way almost impossible to notice. She had no idea he understood everything, that this small piece of paper had ignited a fire in him that nothing could extinguish. Ethan stood, walking out of the restaurant into the pale golden light of late afternoon, but as he pushed open the glass door, his eyes turned cold, cutting through the room like a silent promise. He would return, not as an anonymous old man, but as his true self. And when he did, there would be no place left for those who had turned Caldwell's Grill into a hollow shell. The next morning, the atmosphere at Caldwell's Grill Branch 18 was as dull as ever. Staff moved lazily, wiping tables without care, while Lena and Josh's laughter echoed from the service counter. Clara, meanwhile, quietly worked in her corner, carefully wiping every table edge out of habit, not because anyone asked her to, but no one knew that everything was about to change. The glass door swung open, and a man stepped inside. Not the frail old man with silver hair from yesterday, but Ethan Caldwell, CEO and founder of Caldwell's Grill. He arrived in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his tie neatly knotted, polished leather shoes gleaming under the warm lights of the lobby. His hair was combed neatly, but it was his eyes that froze everyone in place, cold, steady, radiating authority. The moment Ethan entered, the laughter stopped abruptly. Melissa Quinn, the hostess who had barely glanced at him the day before, stiffened, her face draining of color, her hand unconsciously lowering the cloth she held. Lena and Josh froze, unable to meet his gaze, while Clara, setting down a tray on a table, looked up in stunned disbelief, her eyes wide, her hands trembling slightly, yet a flicker of hope shone through. Ethan stopped in the middle of the room, his eyes sweeping slowly over each staff member. He didn't speak immediately, letting the heavy silence settle over the space. Only a few seconds passed, but to those standing there, it felt like hours. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and even, every word cutting through the air like a blade. "Thank you for yesterday. You showed me everything I needed to see, clearer than any report ever could." His words were calm, but they struck like thunder in the stillness. Melissa swallowed hard, Lena lowered her head, and Josh took a half step back. Clara stood still, her eyes trembling not from fear, but because she understood exactly what was about to happen. Ethan stepped toward the counter just as Mark Heller, the branch manager, emerged from his office, laughing into his phone. But the moment he saw Ethan, his smile vanished, replaced by confusion and a hint of panic. "Mr. Caldwell? Why are you—" Ethan raised a hand, cutting him off without a single polite greeting. His eyes locked firmly on Mark, unwavering. "I want everyone gathered here, right now." Within minutes, the entire staff stood in the lobby, silent and tense. Ethan looked around, placing a hand on the counter with quiet authority. He didn't shout, didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to fill the room with weight. "Yesterday," he began, his voice steady but each word striking like a hammer, "I sat in the corner of this restaurant and ate the worst meal ever served under the name Caldwell's Grill. I heard how you spoke about your colleague. I saw how you ignored customers. And worst of all, I watched the head chef sleeping during working hours." A murmur started among the staff but died instantly when his eyes swept across them. Mark's lips pressed tightly together, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Ethan drew in a slow breath, then looked directly at Mark. "We're going to talk, but not in an office. Right here, in front of everyone." The room fell into absolute silence. Every eye was on Ethan, and everyone understood that this moment would change their fates forever. The entire dining hall was heavy with silence, thick enough to feel, the only sounds coming from the quickened breaths of a few nervous employees. Ethan Caldwell stood there, and he didn't need to raise his voice. His calm posture and cold, sharp gaze were enough to make everyone lower their heads. He took a slow, deliberate step toward Mark Heller, each footfall soft but echoing clearly in the deadly stillness. "You're managing this branch, aren't you, Mark?" Ethan's voice was slow, steady, and sharp as a blade. Mark swallowed hard, forcing a strained smile. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. But we've had some difficulties lately, short-staffed. Customers have been unpredictable. Short-staffed?" Ethan cut him off, his eyes cold as ice. "Then how do you explain me having to find my own table, customers being ignored for over 10 minutes, food so bad it was nearly inedible? Or should I ask your head chef, the one I caught sleeping during working hours?" Mark's face went pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I'll fix it immediately, sir. It was just a temporary mistake, I assure you. Temporary?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, his voice dropping a tone, every word heavy as a hammer. "The cruel gossip I heard about a dedicated employee was temporary? Customers being treated like a burden was temporary? No, Mark. This isn't a temporary mistake. This is a culture you've allowed to exist here." A few of the younger employees, including Lena and Josh, stared at the floor, not daring to breathe too loudly. Melissa stood behind the counter, her face drained of color. Only Clara remained still, her eyes wide, filled with both worry and hope. Ethan turned back to Mark, his voice calm but unyielding. "You're fired, effective immediately. No handover, no explanations. Caldwell's Grill has no place for anyone who disrespects its customers and tramples on the core values of this brand." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but one firm look from Ethan silenced him instantly. Ethan pointed toward the door. "Leave, now." The hall was silent as Mark slowly removed his staff badge, his hands trembling, then turned and walked toward the door. The sound of the glass door closing behind him felt like a definitive ending. Ethan didn't look back because to him, Mark was no longer important. His gaze swept across the room, and several of the younger employees straightened their posture, as if to prove they didn't want to be part of what had gone wrong. Finally, his eyes stopped on Clara. "And now," Ethan said, his voice softening slightly, though still firm, "we will talk about the people who truly deserve it." Clara flinched slightly, her hands tightening around the edge of her tray, unsure of what awaited her. But Ethan gave a faint smile, a rare one since he had stepped into the restaurant. The entire room was silent as Ethan Caldwell slowly stepped forward, stopping directly in front of Clara Reyes. His eyes, stern since the moment he had arrived, softened now, becoming warmer. Clara stood frozen, her hands unconsciously tightening around the edge of her apron, her eyes flickering with worry. Ethan looked directly at her, his voice deep and steady, every word carrying weight. "In this room, there is only one person who truly understands what Caldwell's Grill was built for. Only one person who still holds on to what I put into this place from the very first day: respect, dedication, and pride in their work." All eyes turned toward Clara. Lena swallowed hard, Josh stared at the floor, and Melissa didn't dare lift her head. Clara's eyes widened slightly, her lips trembling. You mean me?" Ethan gave a slight nod, and for the first time that morning, a faint, genuine smile touched his otherwise serious face. He reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a new nameplate, its polished metal gleaming under the warm lights. The finely engraved words shone clearly. "Clara Reyes, Floor Supervisor." Holding it out to her, his voice was firm and resolute. "Starting today, you will lead this team. You won't have to apologize to customers for other people's mistakes anymore, because you'll have the authority to change things." Clara froze, her eyes glistening with tears. Her hands trembled as she accepted the nameplate, staring at it as if she couldn't believe what was happening. I don't think I deserve this. I was just doing my job." Ethan's smile grew just slightly, rare but sincere. "The very fact that you don't think you deserve it is why you deserve it more than anyone else." A round of applause broke out from a few of the staff, hesitant at first but quickly growing stronger. The clapping wasn't just for Clara, it was an acknowledgement of their own failings. Clara bowed her head slightly, tears slipping down her cheeks, but her smile was brighter than it had ever been. Ethan's eyes swept the room again, his gaze turning firm once more. "I don't need empty promises. I just need you all to look at her. If a woman with aching wrists and tired legs can serve customers with her whole heart, then none of you have an excuse not to do the same." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was a silence of realization. Clara wiped her tears and lifted her head, the new nameplate gleaming on her chest, a symbol that Caldwell's Grill still had a chance to rise again. Ethan drew in a deep breath, his eyes sharp and filled with determination. This is only the beginning. Starting today, Caldwell's Grill will become exactly what it was always meant to be. 3 days later, Caldwell's Grill Branch 18 wore an entirely different face, not because of a fresh coat of paint or new furniture, but because the atmosphere had changed, something money could never buy. The moment Ethan Caldwell stepped in that morning, he could feel it. The laughter was livelier. There were no more whispered insults, no more indifferent glances sliding past customers. Every staff member worked with a new rhythm, not rushed, not lazy, but focused and self-driven. Clara Reyes stood at the entrance, her uniform neatly pressed, her new nameplate gleaming proudly on her chest. Her posture was straighter, her shoulders no longer slumped, and her eyes shone with newfound pride. When a young couple walked in, she greeted them with a warm smile, her voice gentle yet confident. "Welcome to Caldwell's Grill. Your table is ready. I hope you enjoy your meal." The couple nodded in thanks, surprise clear on their faces. They hadn't expected to be welcomed so warmly. Ethan stood quietly in a corner, watching without interfering. He saw Josh carefully place a tray of food in front of an elderly guest, offering a polite smile and kind words. Lena moved quickly, wiping tables and straightening menus, occasionally glancing at Clara as if to make sure she was doing everything right. Even Melissa at the reception desk had set her phone aside, wearing a serious expression and speaking to guests with proper respect. But what made Ethan smile the most was Clara herself. Though her hands were still wrapped in bandages, she moved confidently between tables, no longer bowing her head but standing tall, observing staff, correcting mistakes when needed, and praising them without hesitation when they did well. She had truly become the pillar of this place, just as Ethan had said, the one who holds the soul of this place. Customers were beginning to feel the change too. A family laughed together at their table, and a middle-aged man praised the grilled T-bone steak, saying it tasted just like when Caldwell's Grill first opened. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply, savoring the familiar scent of perfectly grilled meat, a smell that had once been inseparable from his youth. He walked slowly toward the door, unnoticed by anyone. Standing outside, he turned back to look through the glass, where Clara was kneeling slightly to speak to a little girl sitting with her parents, her face glowing in the warm golden light. Caldwell's Grill had begun to breathe again, not through machines or revenue reports, but through laughter, through caring eyes, and through the pride of people who genuinely loved their work. Ethan adjusted his coat slightly, his hand resting on the inner pocket where he still kept the folded note Clara had given him that day. He smiled, no longer the cold, judging smile of a CEO, but the smile of a man who had found something he thought he had lost. Stepping down the stairs, he spoke softly, his deep voice carrying like a promise to himself and to those who remained. The soul of Caldwell's Grill has returned, and I will never let it disappear again. The glass door closed behind him, morning sunlight glinting off his silver hair. Caldwell's Grill Branch 18 had officially been reborn, and this was only the beginning of a true revolution across the entire system. A management expert once said, "A brand is not built by signs or revenue, but by the people who hold on to its original values." Caldwell's Grill nearly lost its soul because of those who forgot that truth, but it was a single dedicated woman who brought it back to life. If you believe that true dedication can save an entire organization, like to help share this story, subscribe so you won't miss other valuable lessons, and leave a comment below with the 3 words, "Keep the fire," because that is exactly what changed everything.